Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the mitigation and management of musculoskeletal problems. My name is Holly and I'm part of the professional development team here at IIRSM. The webinar today will be delivered by Adam Hamilton of Healthcare RM, a corporate partner of IIRSM. So before I hand over, there are just a couple of things to run through first. To begin with, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but you'll be able to ask any questions you have using the Q&A chat function on the bottom right corner of the screen. If you type your questions as they come to mind, we will pick these up at the end. And secondly, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be placed on the IIRSM YouTube channel after the event. It will also be shared with Healthcare RM. Okay, that's enough from me. Adam, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that introduction and welcome everyone to today's webinar. As previously just discussed, we're going to be looking at mitigation and management of musculoskeletal problems. And really the purpose of this is to give you all a sort of some tools and an understanding as what you can do on a proactive and preventative side of things for musculoskeletal problems, MSDs as they get referred to a lot of the time. And then how can you manage them in a more proactive way? And how do you stop reoccurrence? Because inevitably what we're looking at is sort of what I'd say is a very holistic view of things and seeing what's the underlying root cause. So when I show you this first slide here, this is a little well-being man that we've come up with. And within that body, we've got loads of different words, which is what makes up individuals. This is everything that is going on with you, I, everyone in the world the whole time. It's everything from our thoughts, our attitudes, our beliefs, through our medication, what's our current conditioning or fitness, how much do we move, are we mindful of what we're doing, what we're eating, stresses or stressors, as I should say, really, that are in our environment, our workplace and our home life. So it's trying to look at everything together rather than saying, okay, well, this musculoskeletal problem has come from, let's say, lifting a box or being sat at an office desk or working in a lorry or working on like the production of of a film set or within a theatre or something along those lines. It's really trying to say, well, if it was really the case that it was the activity, then every single individual would get exactly the same problem. Whereas more often than not, what we see through our data and what I see when I'm dealing with individuals and coaching them and helping rehabilitate them is that everybody is unique and different. So we're always applying these fundamentals and looking at everything together. And another sort of little infographic that we use to help people see this is, it gets kind of called the functional tree. It gets used in functional medicine, and you can see sort of from the roots of everything that's at the bottom, the symptoms stem out of that. So you can see there's quite a kind of diverse range of things that can happen there. And when we're looking at everything together, it's all completely interlinked. So if we just take nutrition as an example, issues with nutrition, so that be poor nutrition, not having balanced nutrition, can lead to people having circulation problems, having metabolic issues, mental health issues, digestive problems, so on and so forth. And that all directly interlinks and relates with the musculoskeletal system itself. So then you've also got within the roots, you've got things like sleep, relaxation, physical activity. And again, all of these root causes have a link to something that appears on the branch. So kind of when we're looking at these issues that people have, these diseases, these illnesses and ailments, rather than just treating the symptoms, so rather than what I say is just pruning the branches off, is you've got to get to the root cause. Very much like if you were going to kill a weed, you would kill the roots of the weed rather than just chop the head off. And this is very much the same in how do you treat issues, is you've got to get to the root cause and nourish the roots to then help the rest of the tree grow and thrive. So that's very much the background of where we look at how we help people, how we assess people, how we deal with the reactive side to support individuals with recovering from ill health, from injury, from any sort of issue, mental, physical, whatever the case may be. Obviously today we're looking at just the musculoskeletal side, but it's then how we apply these principles to educate individuals, line managers, corporations on how do you mitigate that? How do you reduce the risk? How do you be more proactive and preventative towards these things occurring, and really giving ownership to individuals so they can understand, what it is that they can do to help themselves, rather than thinking, oh, I work in a manual job, I work in logistics and I've heard that I'm going to get back pain because I do manual handling, or I do a lot of kneeling because I'm an engineer, I've heard I'm going to get bad knees. Those sort of attitudes and beliefs start to form part of the psyche of individuals. So when we meet them, they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what we want to do is educate them, to give them as much power as possible, to empower them to make those positive self-changes in their life and their lifestyle. Which nicely brings us on to, I've skipped a slide there. The mitigate part. So as I was just covering, is we look at personal fitness for work, and it's fitness really in the sense of, are you fit for purpose? Are you able to carry out your job role? Are you conditioned for it? And we know this from individuals that have been in work for a long period of time. They get work hardening, they get work conditioning, which is very, very good. But it's also making sure that we address if there's any imbalances there within their musculoskeletal system, which is why moving to the kind of second bullet point I've put there is functional movement screening. And what that is that's assessing individuals on a one-to-one basis. We do it in groups as well, and it is effective in groups because it does cause a lot of banter and laughs as people are trying to do these functional movements, which again is quite good for the positive side of normalizing things. And that looks at what functional restrictions people have, how well they move, imbalances within their body, so within their muscular system, and their mechanics, and then how we can address that. So it's, again, this is really part of the preventative side. If you see that someone's got some muscle imbalances, that puts them at higher risk of getting some aches and pains and tweaks and injuries. So it's trying to balance the system out. The way that I use it when I'm coaching people around this and getting them to really understand the principle is, if you're looking at, say, your car, and you take your car in for service and there's an unusual wear and tear on the tires, the first thing a mechanic wants to do is have a look at how well the wheels are balanced, the tracking of the wheel alignment and the steering column, and look at everything that's involved prior to the rubber hitting the road, and make sure all of that's aligned. Then you can get into the nitty-gritty of how's that person drive, do they steer while stationary, all those sort of little nuances that come into it. But by getting the car balanced, getting the wheels balanced and the system aligned, you make sure you get even contact on the road, and your tires work as they're meant to, and you don't get excessive wear. Very much the same with the human body. If you spend your time in a lot of slouch positions, seated for a long period of time, standing for a long period of time, or do repetitive movements and don't do anything to counteract it, more than likely you'll develop a muscle imbalance. And I see that with elite athletes a lot of the time, rounded shoulders in swimmers, very tight hamstring muscles in certain individuals, tight lower back muscles in other individuals. So we apply a methodology of balancing that out, and it's one of those things that helps reduce any ongoing issues and really makes the individual understand how they can help themselves. So why that's important is really, it comes to the next point of, you want employees to be as active as possible in and out of the workplace. And I've spoken about this before with clients, is looking at job rotation and how they do jobs, so that you're mixing up the postures. So the next posture you're in is the best posture you can be in. And the principle of that is keep yourself moving. So the more active you can be in work, being in different positions and postures, the better. And then likewise, when they get out of work, what's that individual's habits? Do they spend all day being sat in an office and then spend all evening sat in front of the TV? that's the same posture, that's going to lead to muscle imbalances, and that's going to cause an issue. So how to correct those imbalances is to give them something that's the opposite. So if they're seated for a long period of time, get them to do something that's standing up. Somebody actually stands a lot throughout the day, get them to do, make sure they do sit and they rest and they take the load off their cardiovascular system as well. So it's really trying to get those balances. And that's why the functional movement screening is so important, is to give that bespoke kind of advice and information to individuals. And then that kind of really follows on to getting conditioned for the job roles. Now, when you first enter a job role, it can be new. You can develop some aches and pains. That's normal. And it's making sure people are conditioned and ready for the work that needs to be done, particularly with businesses that have highs and lows of, where they have a period of time, say around the holidays or Christmas, where the workload goes up. It's preconditioning them ready for those higher work volumes. So within a sports terms, it's your pre-season training before you get into season and competition phase. And then after the season finishes, you go into post-season kind of rehabilitation. The same sort of thing should put into the workplace, really, to help those individuals mitigate having and prevent any issues from occurring. And then I've putting standard operating procedures in place. Again, this is so important, and it's making sure that people do follow the standard operating procedures. They do use the PPE and follow manual handling regulations. They don't try and cut corners, because that's time and time again something that I see where, there either isn't a good, efficient way of doing something, or people are cutting corners. And again, it's kind of the blatantly obvious, but it just needs to be there to reinforce the point, which follows nicely onto the last element here, which is personal ownership of health and safety and well-being. So it's all three. It's not just the individual's responsibility to make sure they're following the health and safety guidelines. They're also responsible for their well-being, turning up to work fit for purpose, making sure that they are looking after themselves and their colleagues, that they're not trying to just do a rush job, or they're not thinking of things, or they're having late nights, or whatever it might be. There's so many personal risk factors that people need to know that it is their responsibility to take ownership of their well-being, to turn up ready for work, mentally and physically. And then how employers and people like ourselves can help support individuals to empower them to have that ownership and understand what does that mean in its fullest detail. But it is a very important sort of factor that I have seen time and time again, where people don't take that ownership, and again it leads to accidents, injuries, lost time, and the kind of the first step on the ladder, so to speak, would have been to get them to take ownership, would have prevented a lot of issues from taking place. So how do we manage it? Well, the management kind of dovetails in quite nicely to the prevention, the proactive side of things, the mitigating side of things. Is you, following on from what we just said about personal ownership, it first comes to management of a lot of musculoskeletal conditions is down to self-help and self-management before you even get to the hands-on treatment stage. Even if you do need hands-on treatment, whether that be physiotherapy or seeing a consultant or anything along those lines, there's a huge portion of that treatment pathway that is self-help and self-management. And by this, I mean following the advice of the professional, following the advice of the physio, doing your exercises, doing your stretches, adjusting your posture. All of those things are so important. But time and time again, we've got ourselves into a situation as a kind of culturally, globally, not even just within the United Kingdom, where we become treatment seeking. We want scans, we want diagnoses, we want somebody to fix us, we want a surgeon to repair that disc or to do whatever. And we haven't taken the more conservative, lower levels of the stepped care approach, which is so important, because even if you do need to have something that's more intense in terms of a treatment, if you apply the foundations of the recovery by doing the self-help and self-management, you will have a better outcome and you will prevent future relapses, reoccurrences, and flare-ups. When people skip those steps and they don't do the self-help and self-management and go straight into treatment and straight into getting an MRI scan or something and expecting that it can be fixed by someone else, if it ultimately comes down to a surgical intervention, the surgery will not be as successful in the long run as it will if you apply the self-help side of things. And that's what's termed as prehab. It's prehabilitation to surgery before having the surgery, which then helps with the recovery and the rehabilitation. So this is very, very important, which is why I've then put as a next point on here is functional rehab programs. They're very, very important because they address everything again with the individual. They address the psychosocial factors, the attitudes, the beliefs. They use the kind of approach of looking at activity levels, graded return to exercise and activity, looking at functional restrictions, looking at functional capacity, and rehabilitating someone completely and totally based around their goals and where they want to get to as well. So people that we see on functional rehab programs really vary from maybe a 30-year-old that's had some ongoing issues with their lower back to a 65-year-old who's been suffering with some chronic pain for the last 40 years. So there is a wide range of people that can attend functional rehab programs, but they are a very, very important and beneficial way of managing these musculoskeletal problems and educating individuals on how they can stop it occurring in the future. So they're very, very powerful. And again, we've got on here, we've got personal ownership because this is part of the self-help side of things. It's part of the functional rehab, and really reinforcing to those individuals, you have to take personal ownership. You have to look after your body and your mind through good nutrition and through good amounts of activity and grading yourself up daily. Because if we don't look after our mind and our body, it will start to, kind of fade away, so to speak. And we start to lose those capabilities and the strengths that we have if we don't apply these principles. And it doesn't need to be someone following some fad diet or going to the gym 5-6 times a week or running marathons or anything that extreme. It's up to the individual, but it's helping them recognize that they have the power to look after their own health, and that this has been known for quite some time. It goes all the way back actually to the ancient Greeks of man has power over his or her health through the medicine of just good nutrition and activity, which is why we put on there the graded activity and graded return to full duties. It's really important to phase people up. If they do get injured, they do have an issue, is to get them to step back for a bit from what they were doing. This is something we advise on a regular basis, and then grade them up slowly, and that's done on an individual basis, but really using positive language with individuals, positive messaging about recovery, about how they can be proactive and preventative, rather than what we've had for a long period of time now with sort of manual handling regulations or anything that's involved musculoskeletal. Oh, don't do that, you'll get a bad back. Don't do that, running is bad for your knees. All of that kind of negative language and messaging plays on people's minds. Whereas if you flip it to, well, if you train yourself, you'll be stronger and you'll reduce your risk. Or if you learn to do that correctly, you're going to be more conditioned. It's all about the language and the messaging and how you put that across to individuals. And particularly in the rehabilitation stage of overcoming an injury, is the last thing that you want them to be thinking, even on a subconscious level, is that they are now in some way damaged or broken, and that this will be a reoccurring thing that will happen. Because we actually know through correct rehabilitation and conditioning, you can prevent future occurrences, and people are actually more intrinsically aware of their body and how to do things, that they reduce the risk, rather than being a little bit flippant of doing things and not looking after themselves once they've had that kind of incident happen, they look after themselves a lot more, which it links onto this next point, psychosocial factors. What I mean by that is obviously the psychological side of things and the social side of things, and how they're combined together. So use of language, attitudes and beliefs, what people do in and out of work, their social behaviors, how they think about things, how they address their life in general, the working life and outside of that. Do they think because they have a manual job that they don't need to do any exercise or activity? Or do they think that because they're sat in an office all day, the only way to counteract that is to go and do a 1 hour high intensity class, and they can't understand why they get injured all the time? So it's really looking at those side of things. And that is really, really important as well into helping manage everything. Is, again, you can't separate the mind from the body. They're completely interlinked. So understanding where someone's at from a psychosocial perspective helps understand where they are from a physical perspective, which is why one of the things that I've added on to this last piece about management is avoid using the term light duties, or avoid saying you're going to put someone on light duties, anything around that, because what does it mean? It doesn't really, I've spoken to several clients, they all mean something different. It usually has a negative connotation to a lot of employees. When they're put on light duties, it's a feeling of, I'm not capable, which again has some psychosocial implications on the individuals. Whereas, using things like modified duties, or, we're putting you on your graded return, there's more positive psychological messaging that can be used that can really help that individual. Okay, you've been off for a period of time, or this has happened. We're gonna do a graded return, or we're gonna put you on this plan to help you recover and rehabilitate stronger. And that's more positive from the kind of psychosocial aspect for individuals. So to kind of summarize everything and to bring it all together, you really want to make sure that you're combining health, safety and well-being all together, all as one piece. You can't separate them because they all interlink into this element of who we are as individuals. Looking after each one in isolation won't give the same results as if you look after all of them and you get people to understand the ownership they need to be empowered to look after all three as a collective rather than separate them out. Definitely carry out functional movement assessments with individuals. That doesn't matter whether they're in a physical role in a warehouse or they're in a more sedentary role in an office. Functional movement assessments are absolutely key of sort of doing an MOT really on the body and the musculoskeletal system. And yeah, that then takes us into make sure you turn up fit for purpose, keep yourself fit and healthy outside of work, and make sure that people are following the correct processes. I know it sounds common sense, but time and time again, I've found that is an area where things have happened and people have changed the process rather than reinforce the process where it is actually a good process, and it's the individual who needs to improve the capabilities and fitness, which can be done, can be trained. And then again, I think these kind of final points of developing a culture of transparency and awareness of ownership of how we're going to do this, of getting people all on board with the messaging of we have to look after ourselves and this is where we're at, and if you don't use it, you lose it. So that helps challenge any of these fear avoidant behaviors and sort of the guidance we give to people. If you tell somebody not to do something because they're going to get injured, that can develop a pattern of fear avoidant behaviors in their life, so they then don't start putting stuff in their cupboards at home above shoulder height because they've been told not to do it, when actually it's helping manage the risk and looking at their functional capacity and their limitations, because for some people that's absolutely fine, for others it could be a higher risk. So it's just making sure that through all of this, wrapping it up all together, we're helping educate and empower individuals on how they can look after themselves relative to their capabilities and conditioning, to then prevent any future issues from occurring. But if something does occur, then how they can manage it in the most proactive way rather than just a reactive and kind of very idle management way. This is the most kind of proactive and emptive way of getting anything else as well.
Thanks for that, Adam. So as mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, please type these in the chat function on the bottom right-hand corner, and we will take 5 to 10 minutes to deal with those now. Whilst we're waiting for any questions to come through, Adam, are you able to talk to us about the current COVID-19 situation? Obviously, with many employees now working from home, is there anything different employees or their employers need to consider in relation to musculoskeletal issues, including how to support remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. It's one that comes up a lot of the time. That, most recently is, well, what can we do? And I think because we normally live in an environment where we're off, let's say if we're office based, for instance, and we're at a set desk and we've got, a fixed chair and everything, that people then start to believe that if they don't have that desk and that chair, that something really bad's going to happen. But that's not necessarily the case, because humans are so adaptable. And the thing to kind of ensure is to make sure that you're within kind of, if I say, the ballpark recommendations of having a good setup. And then keep yourself moving throughout the day. Take regular screen breaks. Still the advice that I give if people are in the office and let's say they work on the phone is take some of your phone calls standing up. And same should be done at home. And making sure that we don't become sort of a slave to the laptop and then just start doing a lot of hours, because whatever position you're in is, there's no one perfect position. So when we see this kind of textbook upright position, if you were to hold that for 7-8 hours a day without moving, you would get a lot of musculoskeletal aches and pains. So at the moment, with the whole COVID situation, more people home working, yes, obviously the tendency is to stay seated a lot of time and not move around. But what I've been recommending to people, and particularly to our own staff, is, get up, move around, take a break, regardless of the size of, the home that you live in, whether it's a flat or whether it's a house or whatever, is make sure that you are moving throughout the day, because movement is the key here. Even if it's just doing a few squats by the side of your laptop or marching on the spot, anything and everything will help to prevent your body seizing up and then resulting in those aches and pains. So hopefully that kind of gives a good answer as to what we can do.